Thank you. Good evening. Today is Tuesday, August 30th, 2016, 5:30 p.m. This is a special meeting of the Citizens Oversight Committee, acting as the Citizens Finance Advisory Committee. We will start with a moment of silent meditation, please. Okay, thank you. The main focus of today's Citizens Finance Advisory Committee meeting this evening is actually a workshop on creating budget-friendly public budget documents for our citizens. I will note that we have a quorum present, so I would like to welcome all the attendees in the audience, Susan Slayton from the city staff, and all the members of my committee, whom I'm going to ask to introduce in a second. But just one moment. Sir, AGP, could we get the agenda up on the... Thank you. Okay, so we're going to start with some brief introductions and also a little bit of ground rules. I'd like to make this as interactive as possible. I appreciate your attendance and interest. And if you want to, I'm going to ask you to come up and make comment before, during, and after our discussions so that you don't have to wait till the end. Or I've had a few people tell me they may come later. And also, if you don't want to come up to the speaker stand, you can also come right up here. We have an open mic and an open position, and or if you want to talk to us or show us something. So whatever you're comfortable with, we're good with. No timing. I don't think timing is going to be an issue. So, okay, so we're all going to introduce ourselves briefly. Again, my name is Barbara Spagnola. I'm chair of the Citizens Finance Committee now. I've been serving on this committee prior to its inception when it was the Citizens Oversight Committee. Also serve in the City of Morro Bay on the Water Reclamation Facility Committee. And I've been a resident of Morro Bay for approximately 7 years. I'm currently working as an IT contract advisor for Computer Sciences Corporation, and I do contract, finance, negotiation, dispute resolution, et cetera. Prior to that, 15 years with Northrop Grumman Corporation in middle management. So I'm happy to participate, and I would like you to meet all the members of our committee, starting with the newest member who's joined our committee very recently, Bart Beckman. Bart, go ahead, please introduce yourself.
Recently would be like this is my first meeting. After 41 years with Southern California Edison 3 years ago, my wife and I retired up here to Morro Bay, and we're getting involved.
My name is Marlis McPherson, and I have been a member of this committee, the Citizens Finance Advisory Committee, since it was formed as that, which was, I think, about a year ago now. I'm also serving as the chair of the Public Works Advisory Board. I've been a resident here now for 13 years. I love it here, and I want to give back to the community in whatever way I can. I came from Minnesota, and I had a fairly active career there, mostly doing research and policy analysis in government, in the private sector, and in the nonprofit sector. So I'm happy to be here today.
My name's David Batant. I'm a recent addition to the Citizens Finance Committee. My wife Cindy and I, Cindy's in the audience there, have been full-time residents of Morro Bay since 2013. We moved here from Santa Rosa in Northern California after we retired. And my career prior to that was 26 years with the City of Santa Rosa, most of that time spent in the purchasing office, where we helped city departments in Santa Rosa spend their budget legally and ethically. And so that's my main experience, is spending money. So, but we were part of the finance department, so that gives me some financial background, a little bit of financial background. Thank you.
I'm Betty Forsyth, and I've been in Morro Bay for 21 years, the best 21 years I've ever had. Although when I was married, I'm a widow, that was the best years of my life as well. Right now, I've managed the Fabulous Finds nonprofit thrift store on Morro Bay Boulevard, and I'm mentioned as the certified finance officer, which means I collect the money and spend the sales tax to Sacramento, and I do that. Prior to that, my early life, I was 27 years as a principal in an elementary school in Paramount Unified School District, and we implemented a program budgeting system that was supposed to help us to keep us on track, and we did, because we always had the best budget and the best enrollment. And that's my life story.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. As you can see, we have a pretty diverse group of representatives here. And our mission, in case you don't know it, or for those of you maybe watching on TV or will be watching later on YouTube, we are a voluntary group. We're volunteers. We are an advisory group only. We give advice to City Council and city staff based on matters we're asked to review, and we do that from a citizen's perspective. So that's why we take this very seriously, and we do want your input. So the objective today is actually to show you what our subcommittee of three of us have been working diligently on for several months, trying to basically translate the city's financial data into summary information and into perhaps graphics and charts that would be more meaningful to the layperson and the average citizen. That's our goal, and that's what we're going to show you. Each of us is going to present something, and then we're going to ask for comments. So before I go any further, does anybody want to make any, from the audience, want to make any comments or questions right now? Or are you good to, I'm sure you'll have some after. Okay, and if you just please come and state your name, and I assume everybody's a resident of Morro Bay, but.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Richard Sadowski, citizen of North Morro Bay, and I am on the Planning Commission in Morro Bay, and also volunteer on the WRF Citizen Advisory Committee, and really have a lot of pleasure being also on the Finance Subcommittee with Barbara and Ginny, who are awesome. The community really appreciates your input. I've been involved with the wastewater treatment plant issue since around 2003. And recently, we've had discussions for the past several years with relocation and moving to a site. And to this day, we still don't have one. Prior to that, there was the project was moving along at the current location, but the Coastal Commission, due to sea level rise and climate change, those issues did to try to they encouraged the city to do a managed retreat. There's a lot of people that I talk to and are really disappointed with the way that WRF is going at this point in time. There's several issues that occurred. We looked at, if you go back to the history, looked at the Morro Valley, and currently they're looking at the Tri-W. There's other options that if we look outside the box. But recently, a friend of mine, and kind of following up with what this committee's doing, asked for a simple PRA on what the consultant costs were. And the PRA was basically, they wanted just a summary of the consultant costs. And what she received was a 51-page accumulated transaction listing that she was able to decipher and put down in Excel. And this is not all of the costs, but here we are looking at, we're looking at almost $2 million that we have spent on this WRF just for consulting, okay? This is $2 million that we've spent already. Then we had $3 million around that we spent when we were looking at the current location. And that's why I feel that this committee is a huge blessing to our community. We need to rein in these costs. There is other options that are real viable that we're going to be discussing hopefully in the next October meeting coming up for the WRF. I feel strongly that we are moving. We basically don't have much to show as far as physically for this. My experience is in aerospace. I worked in Vandenberg. I built launch pads with the General Dynamics Convair Group, and then I worked on a DARPA projects with Marquardt and Pratt & Whitney. And one of the things is you got to have a project that is the right project, and then you can move forward. And right now, we don't have that. And I'm going to leave you a copy of this, and if you can make copies for them, and then they can kind of take a look at what we're dealing with here. I apologize that I can't stay. My grandson's having his open house today at Del Mar, so we're going to do that. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you, Richard. Maybe I'll respond to that very briefly since you can stay for a limited amount of time. This is exactly why we are here tonight. We are trying to get information in an easier manner than is currently possible and easy to do. So, and because of that, we want to be able to summarize the information so that any constituent can obtain the information they want, can find it on the website or put a request in, whatever. So we're not here to discuss that particular project, but I think it's an excellent example of the kind of data that we would like to be able to present more from a higher level and a more summarized level, so that will help us guide all of us in our decisions. Does anybody have any comments on that?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
This is one issue that I've been involved with and something I've been very curious about as far as the consulting costs. I'm not sure exactly, but you drew a conclusion or said anything other than throwing some numbers up there. Do you plan on addressing these numbers with at your next WRFCAC meeting to go, not that we have to do it now, but this is something that has not been shown there, and that's a committee you're part of. So do you plan on having a more elaborate discussion around that as far as what we've gotten from consultants and potentially alternatives to that, or?
That's exactly right, and that's what we're hoping to discuss. I feel that with this information, it's pretty fresh. With this information, it'll help the community understand where we're at, where we're going, what's potentially an issue. These numbers are pretty accurate, but they don't even take into account Morro Bay staff time or the hired attorney that they have regarding, like, for instance, water rights and stuff like that. So we have to. This would be I'm hoping for a good turnout at the next WRFCAC so we can, really get a hold of this and understand it better.
And let me speak real briefly to that item. We, as a Citizens Finance Committee, we have been working for months to come up with a template, which I have a copy of right here, that we, Citizens Finance Committee, presented to the project managers and city staff as what we thought would be a very reasonable summary document that could be reported on. And I know I didn't make copies, I didn't think we'd be discussing it, but basically it summarizes operating expenses, consultant contracts, and operational costs, and then revenues. One sheet. Yes, I'm going to try to shrink it down to a letter size versus legal, so you don't need a microscope to read it. But it's pretty comprehensive. It will contain quarterly, year-to-date, and fiscal year to date and total project to date. And we have been working on that. That came from the Citizens Finance Committee, not the WRF-CAC. And they have agreed, Mike Nunley and Associates, that they will populate this. They started to, and they're going to do it on a quarterly basis. City Council is asking for this information. And the next quarterly one, the quarter ends September 30th. It we may not have the quarterly update because of the way the accounts come in till the November meeting. I don't know. But that's what we are working very, very diligently on. So thank you.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Barbara said, that that's really the purpose of today. We're trying to figure out how to present financial information to citizens in a way that's understandable and clear, and we want citizen involvement in that process. So thank you all for coming tonight.
Sir, did you have a comment?
Yeah, does that...
Go ahead.
You have to keep the mic.
That's fine. I'm John Irwin. I've been here since 2013 too. What I was wondering, does that breakdown you have a breakdown of direct and indirect costs? Direct costs are things like contracts.
Trust me, I know that. I'm sorry, I looked at you funny, but we have not sorted it that way. We can. Our goal, and this was done by previous members of us on the Citizens Finance, one including, I believe, was a CPA, was at least to get the summary information, not just contracts, not just operational costs, everything on a one summary. Then and they're also using a project management system, Procore, for some of the construction costs. We want to initially get this summarized, and then we can slice and dice it any way you want: labor, fringe, direct, indirect, G&A, what have you.
And what's the process for identifying indirect costs?
I don't have that process yet. I mean, I don't know. We're trying to just get it at a high level. How many millions have we spent today? What's our revenue? Are our rates going to cover phase one, et cetera, et cetera? So that will be up to the staff to make that determination. That's a really accounting question. Good question, though.
Yeah, I know when I used to do budgets, one of the issues which I was always dealing with, is my organization would have direct costs, the contracts and stuff, and the other one was, what's your staff cost, and how do you allocate it when it's spread over 2,000 people? And so that is basically one of the questions he has there, and if that's what I think it is, that's probably not going to get answered this try, unless you kind of take a persuader to him, show him.
We've taken a persuader, and they at least agreed to get us the data in a summarized form. So, maybe I'm taking baby steps. But also, as Richard said too, we encourage you to come to those meetings, the WRF-CAC. That's one specific project. We're here talking about all our projects, but and give your input there. And if this is a viable concern, we will listen. We will advise. The WRF-CAC will advise. City Council will advise staff, and we will get the data that is in accordance with GAAP principles, generally accepted accounting principles, so that the reporting is accurate. This has to be. This is going to be audited too.
Yeah, and I was a project manager, and one of my jobs was to figure out where they were hiding the money. So.
Okay. No, good comments.
I'm wondering if, Susan, do you want to address the issue of how staff keeps track of its time? Because I know that there is detailed accounting.
Yes. There is, and what we do is we have, we actually charge to projects. So our public services, our public works department will allocate their time based on the project they work on. We have project accounting in our financial software, and so we do make a point of charging out the time that they're actually working. So it's a direct charge into the project to include their benefits, CalPERS, whatever whatever benefits are going in for that person. So everything goes into the project, and it's done right through payroll.
One of the things I used to do was support I worked for the Corps of Engineers, and we support US EPA doing Superfund stuff. Everything we did for that had to be, so they had to be able to take it into court to explain to the responsible parties. So every few months I'd go through and say, who's this? Is there anyone who does like a who's this on our project? And usually it's, usually you don't want the contract offices explaining their costs. You want to have somebody looking at that and bringing the question, is there someone who does that?
So we do have our Public Works Director, Rob Livick. He's the one that approves the timesheets when they go through, and he knows the people that are working on the projects. We have our Capital Projects Manager, Rick Sauerwein, who's also aware of who's working on the projects. Plus, a regular detail is provided to our consultant, Mike Nunley. He reviews all of the costs on a life-to-date and quarterly basis. So each quarter, he asks for a life-to-date on the project, and he'll review. They get detail and.
Well, yeah, I understand how that works. No, what I'm wondering about is, Rod Livick has got a budget to hit. He's not going to question if somebody needs to charge something, and he doesn't think he's going to get picked up on it. He'll let him charge. I've worked governments long enough to understand that process, but it helps if there is, quote, I was a project manager for the Corps of Engineers, but my customer was the US EPA. And I would look at it as a lawyer for the US EPA because that was my customer for that task. Who has that responsibility in the city?
That's probably Mike Nunley, because he's looking at the total project costs. He gets a breakdown with the names of the people that are charging to the project. So if he sees someone who he doesn't recognize, he's very likely to come up. I believe there's only 2 or 3 people, actually staff, that are assigned to the project.
Okay.
Very small number. It's not large.
Okay, thanks.
It's October, first Tuesday of October. Do we have another comment there? Please come up.
That might be a good thing to say as well.
Oh, I think I have it on my concluding, yeah. I'll put it. Yeah, okay, we'll do that at the end, okay. Because I was really good. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. I'm Betty Winholtz. The same kind of talk that you're having about the wastewater treatment plant, I'd love to see you do with the city attorney's budget. For this reason, we used to have an in-house city attorney, and now we've contracted out. And I'd love to see to what extent we've either saved money or spent the same. And I know that he doesn't do all the legal work, so there must be other things in other budgets. And again, that's something that can't be teased out by us, but you can probably tease out and give us a realistic picture of how much we're spending on legal.
That's excellent, and we've actually at one of our CFAC meetings had that very discussion. That and same thing with the outsourcing of the dispatch, comparing. And basically what we found, I believe the budget out of the general fund for the city legal attorney is $150,000 per year, if I'm not mistaken. But then there's other enterprise funds if work is done specifically for that. So we've had several discussions. I don't have the total figure, and even if I did, I think you have to be a little careful when you have a major project that's going to consume initially a larger portion of your legal budget that you're comparing to previous years if you're not comparing to apples to apples.
Right.
In my concluding comments, I'm going to discuss a couple things that we are looking at in the future to do, and we'll certainly add that on to the agenda. So excellent suggestion.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think I guess I better start with the agenda since this is a formal meeting. So other than the introductions, on the agenda item up there, you can't even see it, but item A is the consent calendar, but since we did not have a quorum at our last meeting, there's no minutes, so we can blaze through that item and move along. So that brings us actually to the core of today's meeting, business items. And the first one is the objective, which I think we've already described, but I want to make one sentence, one comment, because I think it's very important for us. We, the subcommittee that's worked on this, and all of us with our input, we believe the budget is very important. We believe it is the strongest statement of our community's priorities. And therefore, we think the community should have a role in the creation, development, review, analysis of that budget. So what we're doing today, and we've already heard we need to do more on the WRF, the water reclamation facility, but what we're doing today we think is a start. We need your help, and that's why we're asking you for your comments. So please bear with us. We're going to get to the meat of the presentation, and then you can ask even more questions and make comments if you will. And the second item, B, 1B, is the background on the Citizens Finance Advisory Committee. We call ourselves CFAC, CFAC, but technically our name is the longer version, Citizens Oversight Committee, acting as the Citizens Finance Advisory Committee. And that's because the Oversight Committee was chartered by the passage of the ballot initiative in 2006 that created the district transaction 1/2 cent tax, commonly known as Measure Q. We'll give you some charts on that later. That is mandated by the ballot initiative that we would have a Citizens Committee that would review annual expenditures. But then in 2015, the City Council asked us to expand, the Oversight Committee expand our role and give advice, again, from a citizen's perspective on a lot of financial issues. So that brings us to where we are today. And so one of the things we've done is we've heard from a lot of people, we don't understand the budget, we don't understand the process. How do we make any sense of it? How do we advise our leaders on what should be a priority and where the funds should come from? So we did some research on what some other cities are doing, and then we've come together to present up here on your agenda 3 pages of, maybe we want to just kind of, we're going to go over each page briefly, ask you some questions, what your thoughts are, would people be interested in this information, et cetera, et cetera. So the first page of our summary deals with all funds, general fund, enterprise funds, et cetera, et cetera. And my colleague, David Batant, is going to discuss that at a higher level, present that. He's one of our subcommittee members. So Dave, would you take that? Thank you.
In general, this 3-page document it's a simplified view of certain aspects of the budget. Many public agencies in California have a simple snapshot of the budget, and many of them use pie charts as a way of showing revenues and expenditures. They cover different things, but the development of this was really based on what we saw other public agencies doing. And this first page, along with the other 2 pages, is done in pie charts. How is the budget funded? How is the budget spent? Showing dollar amounts and percentages in a very general, high-level look. So hopefully it's something that the average citizen might get some information from if they have ideas about where the funding comes from and how the city spends it. And one of the interesting takeaways I have here, these 2 pie charts also include all the city funds. They include the enterprise funds, the general fund, everything. And one of the interesting takeaways here for me is how the budget is funded is the enterprise user fees are the largest single portion of revenue coming into the city. And general fund, again, is only one of those funds. That's the one that is probably the most visible to people, and I think we'll talk about that on the 3rd page, but the activities that are funded by the general fund are the ones that are the most visible to people, police, fire, parks, but the enterprise funds are a big part of that, a big part of the overall city budget.
I would just like to add to that for those people who are not aware of what the enterprise funds are. These are funds where the citizens are paying for a service, and we are, as a city, are only allowed to charge what the actual cost is. We cannot mix those funds in with the general fund. So if in your water bill you pay for water services, and in your sewer bill you pay for the sewer services, and that cannot be mixed with other funds in the city. We also have a harbor fund, and we have a transit fund. So those are the 4 enterprise funds, and that's why they're distinctive, and that's where the money's coming from, is the money you're putting in when you pay your bills.
So are there any comments on the first page or questions? Remember, this is everything coming into the city, everything going out. It's a mix or summary of the enterprise funds as well as the general fund, just one special fund. Go ahead.
Is there a reasonableness type check, assuming like PERS? Does the city make an annual contribution to PERS for retired people, or is that supposed to be covered under salaries and stashed away somewhere?
Well, actually, in the first page, since this is everything, it would be, it's not discreetly, obviously, in these pie charts, but yes, absolutely, it's there. Susan can comment on some of the changes in direction of the reporting and the contributing to the PERS in recent years as a result of legislation. And then our auditors have verified all that.
Is that fully funded?
Our CalPERS account, we pay everything that CalPERS asks us to pay. So that doesn't exactly answer your question. CalPERS presents us a bill, we pay the bill. One of the things that we do have is we have side funds, because back in the early 2000s, plans were enhanced. And at that point, you had a person that was working for the city for 20 years making contributions on a less expensive plan that's now moved into a more expensive plan. But those contributions weren't made for that first 20 years. So it created a side fund. The city of Morro Bay was actually very smart in the way they did their side funds, and they set them up to be paid off. And we've been paying them off. So within the miscellaneous group side fund is completely paid off. We'll have side funds paid off for fire and police in the next 4 years, which is rather remarkable if you hear what's going on in the CalPERS world, people looking at 20, 30 years to pay off their side funds. We're going to be done with them in 4 years. So that's really very great. But they are a function of the personnel costs in the budget, so we haven't specifically identified the CalPERS costs, but they are in there.
Okay. Then the other question comes up, risks and opportunities. From what I understand it, the city got tagged for not collecting enough money for water, for water, so they had to increase the water fee, or our water fees, which used to be covered under the general fund. Is there an identification of how those funds have been reallocated?
The water fund's always been separate, and so it's been accounted for as a water enterprise fund.
Okay, well, I was just thinking back to that Bay News article on why the city was asking, and then I went to the meeting and so under the bond, which was issued for the state water, you were required to bill people a certain amount of money, and we were underbilling the people. So that makes certain amount of funds which weren't really required now available, and what was the plan for using those funds?
We were never impacting on our general fund. We were always using money that was in our enterprise fund.
So is that I assume then that's going towards the water treatment plant type?
Right now it's staying within the water fund, so the water fund can start doing some of the upgrades it needs to its infrastructure.
Okay. And then the other thing that hits me is property taxes from Dynegy when it stops. When do those property taxes stop?
They're nearly down to nothing now.
And so what was the plan for dealing with that reduction in funds?
It's pretty much it's pretty much already occurred. Once Dynegy shut the plant down, we gradually started seeing a decrease in our property taxes from the plant. And because it's an industrial plant, we really never got a huge amount of money from them on property taxes because the rates are so low when it's considered industrial. Okay. But we have been dealing with that over the years. We've gradually seen the decline, and once they actually shut the plant down and sealed it and locked it off, the property value went down significantly. But like I said, in dollars, it wasn't a big impact to us. Okay. I don't have all those numbers with me, but it wasn't something that we were, just horrified. What we were horrified about was the loss of the natural gas revenue. Mm-hmm. And that was something that peaked in the early 2000s, 2000, 2001, 2, and 3. And when Dynegy realized how much, or then it was, I don't remember their name, Duke
PG,
Energy.
Oh, Duke Energy.
Duke Energy. Yeah. Duke was paying for it. It was $2, $3, $4 million that we received in a 2 or 3 year period, and dropped significantly off because they weren't able to maintain those, costs. They decided that it was better for them to start looking at other ways to use the plant, and that declined rapidly. So we used that money to buy property with, and we didn't necessarily depend on it for day in and day out operations.
So basically you use that to kind of, whatever they call it, an endowment to support the city then?
Yeah, we bought various properties. We, purchased the property that we've recently repurchased over on 781 Market Avenue. We purchased Flippos. We purchased the property that we now use for our teen center. That might be Flippos, but several properties like that. Resold them, made some money off of them, brought that money in, and then once we started getting the huge decline, we were able to draw on those reserves to keep ourselves if we ran into any problems. But we did put them in a reserve fund so that when the economy went down, we were able to use those.
Okay, and then
I'm not sure what point of order is here. We're here to discuss, the agenda item is to discuss a presentation of the budget, and we all have a lot of questions. Okay. And you can basically argue that anything that has a dollar associated with it relates to the budget and relates to discussion. You can sort of try to weave that into a series of probably 1,000 questions that you or I could both answer, and we can be here till
and
11.
I was pushing like the process.
And one more thing. One thing that really works on the WRF-CAC, I guess I'd suggest that prior to these meetings, if you have a lot of questions like this, you can send emails such that we can sort of prepare and weave an agenda, if you will, around trying to be more responsive to questions like that, because I have a lot. I'm new, so I have a lot of those same kinds of questions. Okay. But I think that might make a little more efficient use of our time here if we could stick to the agenda. If there's other items that we don't know, we can basically take those as action items and then put those for discussion at a next meeting. Okay. Well,
thank you, Bart. And I agree, and I'm sorry I didn't want to stop you. Susan was giving us some good background information, but maybe we come to more of your questions at the end because there are a lot of people that want to. But I think it's indicative of the whole issue in terms of we had a revenue issue, and the revenue fell down or decreased dramatically during a period of time. Maybe the city or somebody could have done better planning, maybe not. But now we're going to have to make some tough decisions. And part of making decisions is getting information, which takes us right back to how do we get this summary information. So I appreciate your questions, but we will have to put a timer on it. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that was on page 1. Yes, please. Or if you, either way, up there or here, either way is fine. Okay. Hello.
Hi there. My name is Dawn Beatty. You mentioned that the enterprise user fees are basically cost. So in the budget funded, it's 15 million, and budget spent is 10 million. So I'm just wondering why it's not 1 for 1. And with respect to these pie charts, and pie charts to me are great. But one of the things I'm noticing is that every different political view skews the numbers to support their cause. And some of the numbers that we all want to see maybe don't support the cause that we believe in or do. So when putting the numbers together, it would really help if, to whatever degree, if one could just like scrape off the political view and just put the numbers out there as best one can as facts, as opposed to only putting numbers out that certain political causes might want to see. I've noticed with people running for office that they're only pointing out numbers that support their cause and not both sides. And if I were running for office, I'd do the same thing. But for citizens, I think we'd like to see the numbers kind of apolitical, if possible.
I'm sorry, I don't understand that. That is not our purpose here to support or refute any political issue. Our purpose is just to report. So if you have something specific, like your question on the 15 versus the 10 million, we have 15 million in enterprise user fees. That's a valid question. Some of this was lumped together out of our accounting system. And then we have 10 million in the enterprise funds. But then also, see, we did a separate for the 2.4 million for the current wastewater treatment plant, and then we have some other special funds that we broke out. So maybe we didn't break it out the right way, and if anybody wants to even mark up any of this and tell us what, too much detail, less, we'll do that, but I may have to agree to disagree with your comment on the political.
I don't want to focus on my question of the numbers, because that's not why you're here. You're here to talk about presenting information.
Yes.
And so my comment regarding presenting information is to the best one can to try to present it in a way that isn't supporting the current council or other council. I keep hitting that.
Oh, I see. Okay.
That kind of, that's all I'm saying.
Okay, thank you.
So we can talk about the individual numbers some other time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just for clarification, you do like a presentation like this on pie charts?
Very much so.
Okay.
It's a good way, visual is a good way to read it.
Yeah, I might also add that one of the things we considered was whether or not to put the actual numbers in there, and we decided to do that so that you can see exactly, not just percent of the pie that's being spent for each function, but you can actually see the dollar figures, and then you can add them up, and you can see that in total, the city is dealing with about $38 million worth of funds each year. So, and you can see where they're coming from and where they're going. So that was our purpose here, I think.
Okay, so I think we'll go on. That leads us to the second sheet, which is the general fund, revenue expenditures, how they're spent, a couple little slices of that. And Marlis, I've asked her to review that with us, if you will, please. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this, of course, is the one that citizens are most familiar with. It's the general fund. It's the fund that provides all of our basic services, police and fire and recreation and legal and the community development office, et cetera, and the public works, the streets, everything that you see on a daily basis, maintenance, comes from the general fund. And if you look at how the revenues are projected for next year, we're looking for, hopefully, getting in revenues $12,760,000 approximately. And you can see where that most of that, oh, we have to switch the, thank you. Everybody's pointing. Yeah, you can see that where most of the revenue comes for the general fund is from taxes, property taxes, sales tax, and the transient occupancy tax, which is something that visitors pay to the hotels and motels, and then they give it back to the city to use for services. I would also point out that the charges for services, that is primarily recreation, fees that are paid for classes and whatnot, as well as what the planning department or the community development department collects in fees for things that they do. It also includes some monies that our fire department earns when they go and provide services for CAL FIRE or other departments. The one that might be odd to you is interfund transfers, and that actually refers to what this gentleman was just talking about. When an employee is working on, for example, the sewer plant or the water, they charge their time to a fund that is user financed, and so that time comes in as a revenue to the general fund. I hope that's clear to folks, but that's what that is. And you can see then in the second pie chart, this is breaking it out by department, and you can actually see that, you know, the bulk of our revenues are going for public safety. They're going for police and fire. That's 45% of the budget. And you can see the other departments that are there. And then the capital replacement and projects reserve, this is something that's new. We are now putting money aside each year to fund projects that we're going to have to pay for in the future. The third pie chart is just another way of showing the same thing, but what it does show is that most of the money is spent on salaries and benefits, so on the approximately 100 employees that we have in our staff that are working for the city. And then the transfers out, I actually looked up what that was also. Oh, that's the money that's being set aside for future projects. So it corresponds back to the capital replacement and projects and some money that's being set aside for information technology. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions about the general fund.
And if I can just add a little bit more about the interfund transfers.
Okay.
On the revenue transfers, we have our cost allocation plan. And the cost allocation plan does capture salaries. It captures funds used for buildings, and the two or the three groups that pay for the primary cost allocation transfers are water, sewer, and harbor. And the other items that come in there can be money that we get from our gas tax that is to support our street maintenance that happens in the general fund. We'll have, that's actually the biggest one that comes in. We have some Measure Q money that's transferred in to cover the additional firefighter that makes up the 4-person staffing in our fire department. So those are a couple of other components, but the majority of this is related to paying for people.
Can I ask a point of order just to make sure that I'm clear on the objective of this document? Again, I'm new, I probably should know the answer to this. But is this document to be used as a discussion document in a quorum like this so people could ask questions? Or is it supposed to be a document that someone who's not at a forum like this could pick up and understand the budget? Because if it's the latter, there's some verbiage that I believe needs to accompany this that are sort of these anecdotes that we're talking about that explain, okay, for example, the interfund transfer, your first comment was, Marlis, that, well, that's probably not clear. Well, you're right. So if this is supposed to be a standalone document, and I'm not, that's a question, is it or isn't it? If, like, my neighbors would want to look at this and sort of understand it, then they would need to have, like, another set of notes. Is that, so which?
Okay, so first of all, it is more the latter. For today, it's the former, discussion, get input, more narrative, less narrative. We have looked at other city documents, and because that's the first one that sticks out like a sore thumb, the interfund transfers or transfers in and out. What is that? almost every other city budget I saw had something like that in it. So we may have to put a footnote in, and that's why we're asking the citizens. Ideally, if we do our job right, we should be able to put this online somewhere, and somebody could get a high-level view. And then if they want more details, then they come to the city or our committee or whomever and get some answers. Go ahead, Marlis.
Yeah, I might also add that in our early discussions about this kind of a document, we talked about 3 different documents. The first would be this. It would be a 3 or 4 page summary at the highest possible level. Then you would have a second document that might be 15 pages that goes into much more detail about the budget and might include a description of each department and how they spend their money. And then finally, you would have the whole budget. So you've got 3 levels, and this is the highest level possible. But I do think we want to make sure that we have whatever we need on this document here. So if there are things that need to be added, like a description of what the interfund transfers are, we can certainly do that.
And if you don't mind, if I could add one more comment to that. When our Citizens Finance Committee was contemplating being formed by our city council members, and oh, by the way, our liaison is John Heading, who's in the audience, so thank you for participating. But 2 council members came to us and asked us to look at the budget study going forward document that the city of Walnut Creek had done 2 years ago. And I have a few copies there laying on the table you can pass around. And when I went to look at that document, it was 20 pages long. It was beautiful. It was 24 color photograph, a history, demographics, and what they actually won an award from the California League of Cities. And so I delved a little further to find out how they did that. They actually put out options for, or requests for citizens to participate. They got more than 100 applicants from the city of Walnut Creek, that's 64,000 population, that said they would join this Blue Ribbon Finance Committee. They selected 15 people, every expertise from accounting, finance, graphics, social media, research, etc. And they put this together, excellent, and won an award on it. So that's our goal. We're not there yet, but that's kind of what started this whole thing. Let's get on that path, and maybe we can learn something that other cities have done that citizens have been interested in. So that's, hopefully that gives everybody a little more background information. But it also gives you some metrics as well. And as Marla said, she was looking at the salaries and benefits in the general fund, which consistently have been 72, 73% over the years. So if you want to cut the general fund a lot, just remember you're going to be cutting salaries and benefits. But Walnut Creek study, and they actually were having revenue and expenditure problems, which kind of started them down this path of let's communicate. Their percentage on the 2014 to 16 was 62%, which kind of tells you right there, when you have a larger city and a population base, you're going to have some, elements there where you'll get a little better return in terms of the number of people. We have a certain level of service we have to provide. That's going to be more difficult for a 10,000 population city than 60,000. But I think that kind of gives you an idea where we're at. Go ahead, please.
I just have one more comment. One of the things that we've been tasked with is to do some benchmarking to other cities that are of a similar size and also coastal cities, so that we can get a good idea of how we compare to cities that are like us, and looking at how much they spend for various services, and to see if we can find any kind of chance to save money or some efficiencies somewhere. So that hopefully we'll be working on in the coming year.
Just to add my 2 cents over here, one of the things we found was there was a void in the community about understanding the budget, and the numbers were confusing. And so in an attempt to make it simple, and we tried different ways, and we thought, like we said, the different procedures to do one and then a more in-depth one and go on, because this is essential, as has been mentioned by my colleagues here. If you don't know what we have, you're not going to know what we're going to do with what we have. So we got to get this down clear and precise for everybody.
Excellent, thank you. I think somebody had a comment there, please.
Susan Heineman, Morro Bay. I'm a bit embarrassed I forgot my glasses, and the answer may be on this sheet. But what my question is that a lot of citizens feel like we're overtaxed. And so I was curious about, of all this tax money, how much of it stays here in the pocket of Morro Bay and how much of it goes elsewhere?
Excellent question, and I don't think that's here, but we had thought about that afterwards. We do need to put that in here. Okay, so first of all, federal income tax, zip. State income tax, zip. Sales tax, which 1%, the sales tax was at 8.5% here in the city, or 8%. Every little county has a little variation. So if you think of that, 1% of 8% comes back. So if somebody spends $100 at a restaurant, their bill is $108 plus gratuity. And of that, $1 of that 8 comes back to the city. Okay, and then the district, and then I'll get to the property tax. The district transaction tax is 1/2 cent. That all comes as what we call Measure Q money, and that's for the, as the voters were promised, the public safety. That I'll talk to that in a second. One other tax, property tax. So that's probably the biggest hit to most of us. 9% of the property tax. It varies in different cities from my research, but 9% of the property tax that you write your check out for comes back to the city. The majority of the property tax is going to the county, and the majority of that looks like it's funding education, from community college, public schools, et cetera. Another thing to note on the sales tax, it looks like from what I've read in the city of Morro Bay, about half of that is being paid by out-of-city residents. So that's just information. The other tax that's sometimes a little confusing is the hotel tax, hoteliers. The TOT, Transit Occupancy Tax, that is 10%. That is collected by them, but just like a sales tax, comes right back to the city, all of that, which is very important. And then on top of that, the hotel guests will pay 13%. 3% of that is called a T-bid, Tourist Business Improvement District. That is collected, but that goes back to a special fund just for marketing cities. And what I've made a point of doing, and maybe you folks may as well, is every time we stay in a different city, I scrutinize the hotel tax ad nauseum. And every major city I've been in the last 5 years, business or pleasure, has been at least 15%, some of them 16, 17%. Some are straight taxes, some will have, I've seen some hotel bills with 4 line items of the breakdown of the tax. So I know that's a slippery slope. While everybody else is charging more, we should, but just food for thought. We're competing with all our other cities here in the Central Coast, so just a thought. But I think that's good for people to know, and that's a good question, and that's something certainly we could incorporate in our narrative, because yes, we're paying a lot in taxes, but fuel tax, good example. What did we get? $235,000 last year?
Which, by the way, doesn't even fill the potholes that we have. Right. So it's not going toward pavement management. It's really just filling potholes.
Right. And excellent article in AAA Magazine, July, August summary, if you remember. Look at that one-page article just on the fuel tax and where it's going, and the fact that it's decreased in years, and the highway, the truck user weight fees during the recession were diverted to the general fund of the state and haven't been fully diverted back for, so food for thought on the tax issue, but excellent point.
I think it's great, and I think we probably should have that. It might be a chart, not a pie chart necessarily, but I guess it comes up a lot. Obviously, the taxes do get used beneficially for a lot of us. If we didn't have those taxes, you wouldn't be driving down Highway 1 to get here. So it's not like you're paying them for nothing. But I think that it would be good information just to know, put it to bed, and this fuel tax thing, which I wasn't aware of, I think it would be a nice little table to have.
Very good. We'll do that. And then if we can move quickly on, because I want to see if there's any other comments on the third page of the three-page summary chart, same format, enterprise funds, which we've already discussed. Thank you.
Is it just not a nit, but it's
Go
a
ahead.
slight, are enterprise funds the same thing as enterprise user fees, or is there a slight difference? The numbers are close. One's 15,910 and one's 15,467. I'm just wondering, are they the same thing?
They are the same thing, I believe.
I think we ought to use the same
term
on both pages and then reconcile why the numbers are slightly different.
Some of these charts, the numbers are slightly different. It depends on when they were pulled from the accounting systems and some, end of month
And
transactions.
is there whatever term you want to use? I'm indifferent as long as it's the same one.
Okay, that's fair. And you see, the sewer, the harbor, the water are the biggies up there. But there's a small transit fund that, funds that. And then we've separated out the wastewater treatment plant, the current one that we are working operating jointly with Cayucas. We think that's important as we go forward with the new water reclamation facility, that we isolate those revenues and costs. And then moving down to the bottom half of that page, Measure Q, we've discussed Measure Q. Once again, the main portion of that goes to public safety. We have 14 years of approximately a 15-year debt on the brand new fire station. That loan is being paid back. Under Measure Q, we have a fourth firefighter position for the vacation relief that's being funded, as well as some other 50% of the school resource officer at Morro Bay High School is being funded under Measure Q. We've had meetings with them and discussions, and we believe that is a good use of and a good collaborative. So we fund that officer that is down there full-time. Street repairs this year, significantly higher than most previous years. Some years there's been very little of Measure Q, and the funds were carried forward so they could do more work in the alternate years. But that's what's being financed there. Go ahead, Marlis.
Well, I was just going to say that the reason that we do that is that it's not worth having a contractor come in every year for $500,000 worth of street repairs. So they save it up for 2 years and then have somebody come in and do $1 million worth. Otherwise, it's not a very good use of money to do it every year like that.
Generally speaking. Now, if we run into some other new revenue source for that, then that may change. And on the Measure Q, just as a point of information, our revenues are finally increasing on that. They started out in the 800,000 range, maybe back in 2007, 2008. I noticed the lowest year was at the recession. That was 711,000 in revenue in the 2009-10 fiscal year. This year, the revenue projected, as you can see there, is over $1 million. So that extrapolates to about 7% a year increase since the recession. So that's a good, solid revenue stream. You just have to be aware if there's, we've seen some indication there may be another slight recession in the 2018 timeframe. So you just have to be aware of these things. But the revenues is good for there, and you can see what it's being used for. So. Any other comments? Dave, anybody?
I just comment on Measure Q and how much of it goes to public safety. It's not as much as a lot of people think it is. The amount of revenue that comes in from Measure Q and actually the amount that goes to the police department, for example, compared to what's being used for street repairs. The three biggest pieces of this pie are the street repairs, fire station debt service, and the extra firefighters. Very little of it's actually going to the police department. I know there was a lot of comments when the discussion about outsourcing the police department to the sheriff's office or considering that as a possibility. We voted for Measure Q, and that's one reason why we did it, was to keep our police department. But it's not, it's getting split up in a lot of different directions, and I think it's informative for people to see where that money is going to and how much is going where. And that's kind of the gist of all of this. It gives someone who isn't necessarily tuned in to what's going on in the city's budget the opportunity to look at these pie charts and get an idea of where the funds are coming from, where they're going. How much are we spending on public safety out of the general fund? It's the majority of the general fund. I don't know that people necessarily understand that. And that's typical for most cities. Public safety is the biggest part of the general fund. And that leaves less for other programs that people attach importance to, like, for example, recreation, parks. So I think it's, I think the purpose of this document, the intent of this document, was just to give a very limited view of the budget for people that are not necessarily going to spend a lot of time trying to get into the weeds of how the budget is being spent, the details of it. This is something that could be printed out and put into, inserted into a utility bill so that your average citizen could look at it, get it, and it's a starting point for asking additional questions and seeking additional information. I think that was really the intent of it. But the footnotes explaining some of the terms and some of the labels, that would be a good idea to do that. But I think this is really just the starting point, and probably another type of document that has a lot more detail to it, like the WRF contract expenditures and other things like that. That's going to be a lot more information, and that would be a different document, probably targeted to a different audience. So that's my comments.
Thank you. I think another thing that we were thinking about is we didn't want to make it, this comes in and this goes out. It has to be a little bit more detailed than just what's coming in and what's going out. So trying to get that balance and to make it somewhat standalone, and then follow up with different ways of presenting it later on. But we know the people in this community are not dumb, and they're interested, and so they're not going to be just interested in this what came in and this is what we spent, and thank goodness we have it.
Just one nit, and that's that I think it's obvious that the pie chart is for the way we spend it, not the revenue. The revenue is like a number, so that can easily just be put over to the left or something. In this particular case, I think these are very self-explanatory, personally. I think this particular pie chart, you don't need any footnotes. I think we all know what they are. On street repairs, are there any street repair funds in the general funds, or is the only money we're spending on street repairs what's coming from Measure Q?
It's only the money coming from Measure Q. There is no money in the general fund for the pavement management. It's only the gas tax that goes for potholes. So that's something that I think people need to know, because, and I should mention, by the way, that we are going to have a street summit, and everyone is invited to that. That'll be I think it's September 14th, 5:30 here at the Vets Hall. It's a joint meeting between the Public Works Advisory Board and the City Council, and we really hope the public comes out to talk about streets. And I think we're also going to talk about how we finance streets, so that's an important topic for discussion.
And the other side to Don, this committee did not try to say how that money should be spent. It's merely portraying it. So some political view, it's just not there. This is just literally to say, okay, this is what it is. You might want to argue politically, why do we spend this, split it up that way? But that's a different discussion. This is simply to say this is the way it is. Is it understandable?
And that's a good point. And I did say the fuel tax was about $235K, but I think last I checked, the general fund, they spent $268,000. Majority of that was potholes, a little bit on storm drains and trees. So don't want to mislead anybody. There is some money. Fuel tax goes in the general fund, a few more, but the majority of it is not fixing the streets the way the citizens view, rehabilitating the streets and getting them up to the, PCI of 70, as Mr. Livick says, or, acceptable C minus grade, I think. But that's a whole other separate discussion. But again, I believe you cannot make good decisions if you don't know what your source of revenue is, how much of that is variable, how much of it is fixed. And so that's underlies everything we're trying to do here. Any comments or anything at this point from the audience before we proceed? Okay, so we have one other document here, and this is something I'm going to ask Ms. Slayton to present. It's just a little different format, but some other cities call it budget and brief. And she actually had developed something similar a couple years ago, and I don't know that there was any interest or it went anywhere. So, Susan, you want to just go over that real quickly and
Sure.
see if...
So the budget in brief came from a webinar that I sat through, and this is something that the city of Riverside puts together. And Riverside had this document. I looked at it and I thought, well, let me see what I can do. And so back in 13-14, I put it together, and it was sort of a bad transition year to try to do something like that. And so council, while there was interest, it was just bad timing on my part to throw something like that out there. And when the new city manager came on board, again, he was trying to delve into what was going on. And so the timing on introducing this wasn't good. With the Citizens Advisory Committee, it was great because I could throw this to him and say, this is something that I threw together. Maybe we want to use this. So this actually was something that I stole from Riverside. They gave it to me, so it was okay. But what they did was they tried to break things down into a 2-page document that could actually be double-sided, that council members could carry around and give you just a very brief overview of what our budget was doing. And it was all supposed to be about the budget for the current year. And the first page is just simple, replications of what we've already presented. They're just a little bit smaller, a little bit of language in them, anything's changeable. The second page to the document was something that they put together in Riverside to kind of say, okay, this is the actual number for the property taxes, because the graphs are much smaller on page 1. It was a little difficult to tie numbers in too, so they then presented a little table to show you a few other things that were going on. They also had some city facts, a little bit about the city, the population, when it was incorporated, square miles, just simple facts, a little bit of demographics, and then also contact information for your city officials and your city staff. So this is just a little bit different way of presenting items that could be interesting to the public. Now here in Morro Bay, most everybody knows they can call City Hall and get any number they want and find out anything they want to know about how to get a hold of people. But this was just designed by a larger community so that council members could carry it around. Somebody could stop them in the grocery store and say, hey, I can't get a hold of so-and-so, and they could whip it out and say, here, this is the number that you need. So some of this could be tailored a little bit differently. Our community's different. And I just threw it together and brought it and thought this could be a starting point as well for something that we could put together, use.
Thank you. So are there any other comments or suggestions before we wrap up? Thank you, Homer.
I was just curious if I kind of like the idea of.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Of including some city facts, just a page of fact sheet, and I like what you've done, Susan. And I was wondering if the public would be interested in like a timeline of the budget process, so that they would see how it was developed during the year, and at the time at which the citizens could participate in the process, because I think we do want to encourage citizens to participate in the goal setting and the budget process. You mentioned, I noticed that there are city goals, and I'm wondering, I have seen in some of these documents where you actually tie funding to the goals, so it becomes really clear how the funding supports the goals, and that's another possibility that might be useful. I don't know if citizens would appreciate that or would be interested in that, but those are some of the other ideas that we had for what you could do with, let's say, a fourth page, so you have a 2-page document on 2 sides.
Thank you. That's a good comment. And again, we're always trying to balance how much information do we put, but I did notice, I think on the 10-year budget plan, it did have the goals tied in, and in theory, that works quite well, and I think that's what good organizations' best practices do. Homer, did you have some comments or want something up there?
My name's Homer Alexander. I approach a citywide budget a little differently. Since fund accounting is as clear as mud to me, I spent some time looking at the revenue and expenses before they were sliced up into the various funds that the government accounting standards require. The city basically maintains one checking account. All the revenue, regardless of source, is deposited. Checks are drawn against that account to pay the bills, just like your own checking account. So with the help of Mrs. Slayton, I put together a couple charts. Where does all the money come from? Taxes, we've already talked about that. Basically, property taxes, sales taxes, and TOT taxes. This is the amount of money the city anticipates all of us will pay this year for our water and sewer services. A couple examples of, well, harbor leases are self-explanatory. That also includes some other harbor fees, but the bulk of it's the leases. Other fees include charges the Recreation Division has for playing sports or the after-school programs, or planning and building fees. I think Ms. McPherson mentioned that earlier. Miscellaneous revenue is some money from the state for the transit fund, business licenses, rents for city property, interest on the city for its invested cash. The actual revenue the city is planning on receiving this year is a little over $32 million. Yet the staff is planning on spending $40. So where's the other money coming from? Well, a little less than $6 million is going to be borrowed to fund all the work that's going to be done on the new water reclamation facility. $3 million of it is going to come from money that has previously been reserved in the various departments and funds. These are personnel costs for all the employees in the city, regardless of where they actually work. Supplies is everything from asphalt for potholes to copy paper. Services provided by others is a catch-all category for outside company that provides a service to the city. A few examples are the Tourism Bureau's contract with mental marketing, legal services, major street maintenance, the contract with the MV Transit for the dollar ride and trolley services. State water is self-explanatory. That's how much the city pays every year, primarily to fund the debt service on the state water project and the debt service on the, for lack of a better word, the Chorro Valley water pipeline, which I'm not mistaken is paid off in 21 or 22. Capital outlays, the majority of this money is going for infrastructure improvements to the harbor and to the city's utilities. There's the amount of money the city is planning to spend this year on the new water reclamation facility. The miscellaneous expenses, the bulk of this money is going to Morro Bay's portion of the operating the existing co-owned wastewater treatment plant. Transfer to savings. This is money the city staff would like to save for future projects or anticipated future expenses. Does anybody have any questions about the way I did this?
No, I think it's good. It's similar to perhaps what you had given us before. I guess I direct my question to Susan. Are we able to extract that? We were having difficulty extracting that from the accounting system so that the numbers would add up to the way we pulled all those together. It's another slice of it, and our goal would be to be able to slice this different ways once we figure it out. But is that something that's very easy, or in terms of the way you and Homer categorize that?
The area that I think will cause the greatest issue is where we talk about transferring to savings. And that's pulling money from various spots. And so we would have to put the identifiers down for those. But the majority of it, that's the only one that I know that we would have to pick out the various spots where we said, well, we're saving this for later, we're saving this for later, and actually list those down. The rest of them are very clear.
Okay. It's certainly something we could look at and use. We were looking for something, an alternative that once we get something put together, we can easily update that every quarter, and it doesn't require, a day of someone's time to do it. And then questions like somebody was already asking, why doesn't this chart add up to this, and, et cetera. Comments, anybody?
No, I was just going to say, it's really just an alternative way to slice the data that we have on the first page of what we've proposed. And I would love to hear citizen comments about which way you would prefer to see it, or would it be useful to actually just cut the same data in a different way so that you could just alternatively see how the money's coming in and how it's being spent.
I like a lot of what you've got here. My first thought is, since the information theoretically this committee got, and you were, I believe, at the last meeting where we had a roundtable, both of us have gotten the information from staff, and the fundamental number is off by about $1.5 million, $2 million as far as the total, and that's going to raise questions right away. Now, I can understand that potentially it's to put in sort of a rainy day fund or something may balance it out, but I think we've got to make sure that that's clear. And it is simply a different way of slicing it, not that there's a different number. Right now, you're saying there's a different number to play with, and we've got to reconcile that.
Yeah, what is revenue and what is revenue? That's the challenge.
Is it possible that we can sit down at a separate meeting roundtable without it being a formal discussion to go through this? 'Cause there's a lot I'd like to understand more, but I don't think we want to go into all the detail now as far as...
There's a piece of this that's missing, though. Part of your out of balance is the city is planning on $1,397,000 in surplus.
Yeah, I found the 1397, but that was what I got when I subtracted 38,379 minus 36,983. So I got the 1397, but not that way. it came, so there's something else added in. So you add 1397 to 3693, you get 38379 on this sheet.
I was just trying to separate the fund accounting because I don't think,
I got the 1397, I understand that,
Right.
but there's something going on here that we're adding to two different numbers,
Right.
and we're not getting the same total.
my purpose for doing this was to try to get out of the fund accounting, which I think is really confusing. And we use terms like interfund transfer and special revenue funds and stuff like that. I think that's where the average citizen just falls asleep. And I was just trying to make it more similar to what the average citizen or small business owner might think. I have a couple other things.
Sure, fire away.
I'm sure you've already discovered that trying to keep track of how the money moves around the city budget is extremely challenging. In the beginning of this year's budget, there's a spreadsheet entitled Salary and Benefit Distribution. I think the spreadsheet should be expanded to show how certain employees or services are spread between the general fund and the enterprise funds. I'm not suggesting the way the staff is currently transferring costs between the funds is not done properly. However, I believe it would be an improvement if these allocations were more clearly defined. I believe that keeping a firewall between the general fund and the four major enterprise funds is really important. The more daylight, the better. I've got a couple examples. As Mrs. Winholtz mentioned earlier, legal expenses. Currently, without going down to the account level detail, it is not possible to determine the amount of money the city is budgeting for legal expense or the amount each fund is being charged. Public Works. Is it really necessary to have personnel expenses in Public Works cut up into 6 different budgets in the general fund? Can't those be consolidated into 2? Public Works Administration and Consolidated Maintenance? By the way, if maintenance is consolidated, why isn't it budgeted that way? Also, the budget page titled Public Works lists personnel expenses of only $370,000. Yet the table of organization has 9.5 employees listed. I know that some of the missing costs are in the Creeks and Tree Street general fund budgets, but there are also personnel costs that are being transferred to the water, sewer, and transit funds. I believe those transfers should be more transparent. As a ratepayer, I'm very concerned that the money is absolutely kept where it belongs. And a couple side notes about Major Q that a lot of people don't realize. Initially, a big chunk, first 3 years of Major Q, the majority of the money did go to public safety, primarily fire, to pay for a new engine and to build that fire station. The other little trivia part that people don't know, and I don't think anybody knew at the time, was that, as you know, one of the biggest sales tax generators are car dealerships. Morro Bay doesn't have a car dealership. However, because the citizens voted on taxing themselves that extra 0.5%, anytime anybody registers a car in Morro Bay, that 0.5% the city ends up getting without deductions. That's the reason that if you ever look at the Major Q tax revenue and compare it to the sales tax revenue, it's greater than half. So thank you all for buying cars.
You're welcome. Homer, if you want to send those questions or if you have them and maybe we can research some of that, go ahead, Susan, please respond.
I do have one comment about the Public Works and consolidating all of the different departments. One of the problems that we have with doing that is we have a street and roads report. So we specifically need to account for street maintenance, street trees maintenance, street lighting, and I think the other one is storm drains and creeks. Those divisions could be scrunched together, but they have to be separate from, and the crews that are out there doing that are part of the consolidated maintenance crews, so they're dividing their time between those different divisions. But those have to be kept separate so that we can do the reporting to the state controller's office.
I think that what Homer presented is very nice in terms of its conciseness, but still, if we're going to have future strategic planning on money, we need to know exactly where that money comes, and we should be able to track it. So I do not like to have too much consolidated under one title, because then you can't break it out later, and then you have to go back and explain how it got in and how it got out and all of that. Like he gave us a little brief summary on Measure Q and how that happened, and how other things that we get, that we get the money less and out. So some of those things we do have to keep separate, I do think.
Good point. Are there any final questions from the audience? Yes, or comments, suggestions?
Hi, my name is Glenn Silloway. I'm a resident of Morro Bay. I want to thank you very much for trying to make this impenetrable thing more logical and accessible. And thank you, Homer, for translating it the way you did. I appreciate the way Homer presented the data because I am so happy that he talked about the funds the way he did, because I find them impossible. The problem, though, is that if you move to something like Homer's suggestion, it still has to tie back somehow. And and the city and the council, I assume, are going to continue to discuss the budget, talking about fund this, fund that, and interfund transfers and all of the other related items that, to the ordinary citizen, reading your budget summary is not going to see. So a problem that you have is to somehow reconcile those in this document you're going to produce. I'm thinking 2 pages is maybe not going to do the trick. You have so much context that you have to provide to make this accessible and understandable that limiting yourself to something that's a handout might be doing you a disservice. Second thing, and related to that, something that what Don said, if you do summarize this data in a way that your very first thing you look at is enterprise user fees, 15.5 million, and then enterprise funds and Cayucas is only 34% instead of 40%, immediately you're going to say, where's the other 6% going? And you don't show it here, and you can't, the way you're doing it. So you have an impossible chore. One good piece of news is that you can do something that you can print in 3 pages or 4 pages, and online you can have 10, because electrons are cheap, and people who want to know can find it. Finally, in terms of context, this document, when you finally have found how to do it, would be useful over time, so that you go into back budgets and do the same thing so that people can see easily how it's changed over time. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I like Homer's, as one of the ways that you can. This is one of the ways that you can handle this thing is you can have, layers of budgets. Like you got level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, however far down you want to go, and I'm sure you're familiar with that. Homer's would be a great level 1. This gets somewhere between a 1 and a 2. That idea of a sheet with definitions and descriptions and stuff, you got to do something like that, or else this is just paper airplanes. One of the things I'd like to see on that sheet there is what is your chart? This was prepared or supervised, or what is your charter? And it sounds like you've got 2 charters. You got the one which the voters gave you, and you got the one that City Council gave you. So you got to keep that separate. But so you're going to have 2 footnotes for that. But that's why you develop. When I get a prospectus from my broker, he says, they send me a thing there, and you've got a discussion of unfunded obligations, which sounds like you got a good stranglehold on that, but it's wonderful if you explain it to what are the risks, what are the opportunities, like for this wind farm they're planning out there. What sort of funds would that bring to the city, and how would it affect the budget? And I mean, you're not talking a huge amount of it. I mean, you're back of the envelope type information on that. One of the thoughts because I used to audit stuff for the EPA, was who has access to your city financial management system? Are they able to look to see where the money goes and where it's been spent, or do they have to rely on city staff to see it? Because that's an audit question on my part, is like, how do we, I've seen people hide money just because they didn't want to get in trouble. So how reliable is your data? There should be some sort of statement or explanation of that. The other one, which is important, is when you get your audit authority, so you can do something like this. There should be a tracking of who's authorized the expenditures. It's got to be council, but there's a statement of that, and who's audited the authorization of expenditure of funds. Rod Livick can't audit himself. He's got to. You got to have some sort of independence in there, which sounds to me like the city treasurer should have. One of his jobs is to occasionally audit what's being reported to the city budget. Does the city treasurer do that, or? Because I wouldn't know how it's organized. I haven't really carried before this. And I think that was everything I could think of right now. But I like Homer's, just to talk to people. Homer's got you break it down to your family budget. And where's the money coming from, where it's going, and what expenses are coming which are going to bite you.
Thank you.
Are there any comments on, the goal was to prepare a document. Homer did a nice job of sort of a tweak of that, an alternative of how to prepare a document that explains to lay people where the money's coming from, where it's going to. Not to argue that we shouldn't spend it different ways, but just what are the facts? Are there comments relative to this document? Is it going in the right direction? If it's, we go further, does it hit the mark of doing that? Would your neighbor be able to understand it?
That's a good question. And what occurred to me is Homer's document approach is a great way to show somebody a one-time shot of what the budget is, where it comes in, where it goes out, and that's enough. But for the citizen who wants to be able to access the budget a little more deeply for policy analysis, because they care about something, they care about streets, they care about water, they care about something, they're going to need to have a little more detail. And that detail is going to have to tie back into the existing budget. And unless Mrs. Slayton is willing to change all of her accounts to match Homer's, it's not going to work that way. So you're actually talking about what the purpose is. And if your purpose is simply to give that single snapshot, then maybe Homer's approach is better. If your purpose is to enable citizens to understand more about the budget so they can get into it and do a little deeper work and understand what's going on, then you need to probably take the approach you're going and try to make it a little bit more comprehensive and a little bit more tied into the budget process so that it would work. But you have two different objectives there, and that's for you to decide which way you want to go.
Thank you. You clarified that well, because those are some of our challenges. Any other final comments from the audience?
Thank you, John Heading, City Council, representing myself only, not the full City Council, as a disclaimer. Perhaps the process is one that is iterative, and I'm trying to just kind of summarize what I heard from the community, not present my own views. I think Mr. Alexander has advocated for a long time to present federal, city, state information with regard to finance in a way that is similar or the same as those of us in small business do, with simple income statement type information. And my thought is there's room for both, even though we don't want a document that is 50 pages, at least from what I'm hearing. perhaps both documents serve a purpose. And I think Lance made a good point that some folks do understand the fund balances and the mandated types of accounts that Susan has to keep as the holder of the city funds. And but secondarily, allowing there to be additional information presented in a format that general business people can understand could be very helpful from what I'm hearing. Once again, not my opinion, but what I'm hearing from the public. And so with that, I just mentioned that, there are a lot of people advocating federally and at the state level for changes in the way we do our reporting and accounting, because it has been an antiquated system that, for the most part, is outdated and is very difficult for non-financial people and even some financial people to figure out. And so with that, I'll just conclude by saying I really appreciate hearing the public input and the information and all the work that you guys have done as a Citizens Finance Committee in digging into this and getting down to the details. Excellent presentation, excellent information, and this council person is very appreciative of that, and I just wanted to air that as well. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Let's go through, any of our members have any closing comments? Maybe start with Bart.
It's a new meeting for me. I would like to see us add to an agenda next time the Cloisters Fire Station property sale and how to deal with that.
We've been discussing that, so yes, Susan, that's the San Jacinto property, and the proceeds going to pay down the loan, I believe. But we can add that to the agenda item. I think that's an excellent suggestion. Thanks, Bart. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just grateful that so many people came out to share opinions with us. We really appreciate it, and we are going to move forward with this project, and we will take your input seriously, and we'll have another iteration, I'm sure, to look at. And we know who you all are because you had to sign in, so we'll check in with you again and see what you think of round 2. So thank you for coming.
Well stated. Bonnie? Betty, I'm sorry.
Well, Bonnie, Betty. My real name is Bertha, so there you go. So, I think it's very informative, and it really expands my thinking in terms of what people are really considering as something as a first item introduction into the budgeting, and also how it would be best serve us to go forward, because the objective at the very end is to have everybody involved in understanding the necessities of keeping our finances in order.
Just wanted to say I appreciate all the comments I've heard tonight and all of your participation in our meeting. And one thing that comes to mind for me is the difficulty of trying to reduce something as complicated as the City of Morro Bay's budget into simple terms that we think that the average citizen can use. And I'm really thinking that we need to consider doing multiple documents with multiple levels of detail, because there are quite a few citizens in this community who are very engaged and need more information. Others will probably be satisfied with just a very high level look. And so yeah, we've got a lot of work to do on this. This was just a first run at it based on what we'd seen other communities do. There's obviously different opinions about how the information should be presented. And I think it is important that we create a document that does tie back to the budget and is easy to maintain and update quarter by quarter, year after year, for whatever finance committee or whatever city staffer is responsible for keeping it, for maintaining it. So again, thank you very much, and we do have a lot of work to do on this.
Well stated, thanks. And I'd also like to thank Susan Slayton for her participation in this and her service. Your pending retirement date is coming up very soon, correct? So the city, actually, along those lines, is actively recruiting for a finance director. And actually, they asked 3 citizens, all 3 of whom are here this evening, to participate in the interview on the down selection of the 9 candidates. And what I wanted to mention was one of the questions we asked every one of those candidates was, what not do you believe in budget-friendly citizen documents? What is your experience creating them and using systems and communicating that information? So that is a criteria that we take very seriously. So I'd like to thank everybody here or anybody else at home. And our committee meets the 3rd Tuesday of every month, generally speaking, 3:30 p.m. here at the Vets Hall. We encourage your participation. We're going to be discussing some future items, some of the basically the metrics we've talked about and proceeding along with this, debt service, et cetera. And we have 2 openings on this committee right now. So if anybody is out there and interested, if you would get back to Susan Slayton or any one of our members, all of our contact info is on the City of Morro Bay website. But it's not a full-time job serving your community on this committee, but it's a little more than coming to meetings, as you can see. So I'd encourage you to attend our meetings. We thank you. We want to work with you in a cooperative and collaborative fashion. So I'll conclude my comments with that. Thank you all. Meeting adjourned.